Good afternoon. It's my pleasure to welcome you this afternoon to our conversation about food waste in Australia. My name is Carolyn Cameron. I'm the manager of food sustainability for FIAL. FIAL is one of the innovation hubs of the Commonwealth Government. And the Food Innovation Australia Limited specifically focuses on the agribusiness sector. So I have a great panel for you this afternoon, and I'll just introduce them to you now. So Katy Barfield is the CEO of Yume. Amanda Kane's come down to assist us from New South Wales, and she's the acting director of waste for the New South Wales Department of Environment, Planning, Industry. We have Jim Mellon, who's the CEO of Second Bite. Brianna Casey's from Food Bank. And Carly Varghese is an associate professor at RMIT and is the head of one of the programs in the CRC for Fight Food Waste. So, without further ado, I'll set the scene with some slides about where we've gotten to with fighting food waste in Australia, and then we can have a conversation with these great folks. Where do I do it? Okay. In 2017, the Australian National Government announced the Australian Food Waste Strategy, which with a goal that responds to the SDGs that we've seen around here, 12.3, which is to reduce Australia's food waste by half by 2030. That's an ambitious task. One of the first things that the Commonwealth Government did to understand this was to do a baseline study and to look across the sectors of the food waste, the food value chain, and to understand from primary production to households to manufacturing to food sector, food service, and institutions, which ones had the most food waste in tons. So this gives you an idea of that. The household sector is the largest sector with over a third, but close by is primary production, and that's crops that don't make it beyond the farm gate. We've also, through the baseline, looked at where across the country the different food waste streams are, and you can see the difference in different states. Some states have more manufacturing, other states have higher primary production. Queensland has a lot of vegetables, but it also has sugarcane. So there are different crops that go into that kind of production. Steve Lappich, who's here from the CRC, has done some work on understanding the economic value of all those different elements of the food value chain. And you can see that there's value. The value goes up as we get more to the consumer end because everything has been incorporated into that. We talk about it as a food recovery hierarchy. We would like to limit the amount of waste that is created overall, but also move that in a circular economy, move that waste up the food value chain. So you're looking at 3.26 million tons goes into landfill. That equates to 76 million tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. And the numbers that we have for water and other aspects of biodiversity, land, fertilizer, they're all used to create the food that we're not consuming. Right? Oops, one more. So what's happening about it? What are we doing about it? The Australian National Government through FIAL, and we have a very great steering committee, some of which I see in the room today, working with the states and territories. There's four main kind of planks to the roadmap to reduce food waste. The one is a cross-sectoral approach with things that go across the sectors like food rescue or like the chill chain. There are things with states and territories that focus on the household and consumer end of the opportunities to reduce the waste overall. We also have opportunities with voluntary commitments in the manufacturing to institutional kind of midsection of the food value chain. And there's opportunities that Steve and his team will be coming up with through the Fight Food Waste CRC and the work that CSIRO is doing as well. So without that, I'll go and start talking to my wonderful panel. So, Brianna, we've seen tons of food waste generated. You know, the numbers are huge. Can you tell us what are the other dimensions of that food wastage in terms of food insecurity?
Yeah, and it's important to recognise from the outset, Food Bank is a food relief organisation. Our mission and vision is around achieving an Australia without hunger. Food rescue is part of what we do, but it's not the whole picture. Because for us, at the same time that we've got a $20 billion food waste problem and we produce enough food for 60 million Australians, we know that at some point throughout the year in Australia, 4 million Australians don't know where their next meal is coming from. 1 in 5 Australian children has experienced food insecurity in the last 12 months, right here in the lucky country. So the issue isn't that there isn't enough food, it's that the food isn't getting to the right places in the right time, or it isn't affordable, or there aren't effective mechanisms for us to be able to get it to people. The way that Food Bank works is very much around a surprise chain rather than a supply chain. We go right back to the farm gate. We work with farmers and growers. We delight in the fruits and vegetables that don't make it to market. We love bananas that are too bendy. We love watermelons that are the wrong shape, because at the end of the day, they are all just as nutritious and valuable as a resource. And I loved in the previous session around global food waste this discussion around us stopping calling it waste. It isn't waste, it is a resource. And the moment that we keep talking about it as a waste, there is a stigma attached to it. And from our perspective, we work with our growers, we work with the food and grocery manufacturers who donate about $250 million worth retail of food and groceries to Food Bank each and every year. And we work with our retailers. And as Jim will talk about, both Second Bite and Oz Harvest are operating at the store level, whereas we operate at the distribution centre level. So we're dealing with enormous volumes of food and groceries. In fact, we did the equivalent of 77 million meals in the last 12 months. We've got 710,000 people each and every month who are relying on Food Bank. And they're probably not who you'd think. They are just as likely to be people living on your street as people living on the street. In fact, 50% of the people that we assist are employed in some way. So I think the challenge for us in having a discussion around food waste and having a discussion around the UN SDGs is recognising that just as valid is the goal 12.3 around halving food waste as SDG number 2, zero hunger. From my perspective, that's the end game, that's the exciting game. And I'm probably the only CEO sitting up here, although Jim would probably fight me for this one too, that doesn't want to have a job. I don't want to be CEO of Food Bank. I don't want Food Bank to have to exist. I want to make sure that we can not only tackle this food waste problem, but that we can create an Australia that doesn't have a hunger problem, because right now we do.
Thanks, Brianna. That's really a great start to kind of think about the other dimensions of the problem. Carly, can you tell us a bit about what the 3 programs of the CRC and how they're helping to understand the opportunities that go with food waste?
Yeah, sure.
Excess food, food that's not food waste.
Sure, thanks, Carolyn. So the Fight Food Waste CRC is actually a 10-year research centre funded by the federal government in conjunction with the industry participants, universities and state governments that are involved in the CRC. It was established last July, and the 3 programs are Reduce, Transform and Engage. So Reduce is all around how do we reduce food loss and waste through the supply chain. As you can imagine, loss is happening at every stage of the supply chain around a whole range of different causes. And so how do we then work with supply chains to really understand what those challenges are and what the opportunities are to actually reduce that waste. The second program is Transform. So that unavoidable food waste that's happening, for instance, on farm or in pack houses, how do we value add that? How do we create value added products and new products? And we had some of those examples spoken about this morning on the international panel. And the third program is all around Engage and various pillars within the Engage program. So a core of the CRC is actually PhD and master's students. So there's a range of opportunities, and if you're keen, keep an eye out on the CRC page. These students will be embedded within the research projects over the program, and will basically give those students, but also the industry partners, talent that can then go on beyond their studies. Another part of the Engage program is the Industry Connection Hub, working with industry associations and also other participants within the CRC. How do we bring knowledge and the needs for industry into the CRC and get that research undertaken? But also, how does the research then get back out to the members and be taken up by industry as a whole? And the third pillar of the Engage program is around consumer behaviour. So what's happening in our households? What's happening in your fridge at the moment? What's happening in your pantry and your freezer? A whole range of different reasons for that occurring. And so the CRC is really looking at tackling or helping to tackle that issue with our partners.
Great, thanks. And Katy. So Katy is an example of a company that's actually responding to the challenges of utilising opportunities that go with food waste. Can you tell us a bit about your business model and how it's working?
Yeah, absolutely. So Yume is a marketplace for the sale of surplus food, and we sit right at the very top of the food waste hierarchy in that spot in prevention. And the part of the food chain we're really interested in is the commercial and industrial food waste. In Australia, 4.1 million tonnes of food, as you saw in that slide, goes to waste in just the commercial and industrial food space. So that's before it's wasted at hospitality level, before it's in your crisper not being crisp anymore. And we're really interested in that. And there's a lot of kind of intangible figures that get thrown around, like 4.1 million tonnes. It's like, okay, well, what does that actually mean? What does that look like? So to give you some context, if we say a pallet of food holds a tonne, which it can do, and we piled 4.1 million pallets on top of each other, my question would be, where do you think that they would reach? Well, the answer is they would reach right up, obviously, into the sky. They would go out past the Earth's atmosphere. They would go right up into space, and they would land on the International Space Station. And they do that 14 times over. Now, that's just Australia. That's just commercial and industrial food waste. So that is just not sustainable. And that's where Yume plays. So Yume's very interested in that sort of product, which is at farm gate, the 2.2 million tonnes that's happening at farm gate. And with Food Rescue doing such an amazing job, but the reality is the size of this problem of food waste is enormous. You know, between the four major food rescue organisations, what you're moving at 2%. It's just nuts. There's so much more that could be accessed, and so much more that must be accessed. So we created some technology, a marketplace called Yume, where suppliers could safely place their product that was surplus, rejected by supermarkets. It might be that it is an unpopular cut of meat. It could be misshapen product. And it could be ingredients. That's sort of the unsung kind of culprit there, which is where you have an R&D project where you have a whole raft of ingredients. So we had, for example, 6.5 tonne of dried fruit from a Kellogg's product that didn't go forward. Well, they're not fruit traders. They don't know where to put that. That goes into the bin. That goes into landfill. It was put onto the Yume platform and sold through to manufacturers. So that's the type of thing we do. So if we look at the suppliers that work with the Yume platform, we're talking about accredited suppliers such as Yume, we're talking about smaller primary producers, Kellogg's, General Mills, a whole raft of big companies. And then they place this onto the platform and they can white label it if they're worried about their brands being sort of customer facing and showing that they've got this huge amount of product that might otherwise go to waste. And then large companies buy it. So it's a B2B platform. If any of you have been in a Qantas lounge in the last 18 months, you've eaten Yume food because they are a huge buyer from the Yume platform. Victorian Government, Canberra, Spotless, Sodexo, the list goes on. We've got over 3,000 buyers and suppliers that are interacting with the platform. So it's really about visibility, I think, because half the problem is that we've got people with food waste problems, but they've got nowhere to place that product. They've got to pick up the phone or find a way to get that to market. So with Yume, you can just put it up onto the platform and then it comes straight through. So that's kind of what we do.
Great. Thanks, Katy. Can you send one of the mics to Jim, please? So Jim is going to speak on behalf of the food rescue sector as an opportunity in that prevention space, way up the top of the food recovery hierarchy. Can you please tell us a bit about Second Bite and what you've been doing? And you're speaking later this afternoon, I noticed as well. So we get a second bite at Second Bite.
Boom, boom. I think we'll have ample opportunity to talk about what Second Bite does in the next forum. I think I'm much more interested in having a conversation about what food rescue and food relief looks like in terms of the country, in terms of the opportunity, in terms of the infrastructure. The one piece of this equation that we are absolutely certain of is that the food's available and that the people who produce the food would be delighted to give it to us to feed hungry Australians. That's beyond dispute. The challenge that we have in this space is largely one of system and infrastructure. All of us have developed, all the organizations in this space have developed the way that they have developed on the basis of wanting to do the best they possibly can with limited resources under difficult circumstances. And that speaks to the shape of all of the players in the space currently. But the reality is that the demand curve for food is moving away from all of us at a rate that is greater in our individual growth. And so the piece of the puzzle that we need to work on and fixate on is the structure of this. This will not be a not-for-profit structure. It is an insanity to believe that the not-for-profit sector can build a shadow logistics infrastructure in this country to make that work. It just won't happen. It will never happen. The piece for us is, one, understanding how the current logistics infrastructure of the country actually works, and two, finding a meaningful way to engage with that process. And I think one of the elements that we've certainly recognised, and I think certainly Brianna's team across the country would recognise, is the producers of food are not the charities. We're the charities. To have them to engage with this process in a meaningful way, we need to think about what the incentivising of this practice looks like. Because we can go around the country with our hands out all of the time and we'll have a limited amount of success. But to develop this in a meaningful, comprehensive fashion that serves not only our needs right at this point, but serves our future needs to have a system that works at every level. We have jointly thought about the avenues in which we can pursue this. We are interested in what the possibility is around our individual tax status as DGR1 status charities. And to bring that to life, if you want to give me a bin of apples, I can give you a tax receipt for the bin of apples you give me. But if you want to move my apples from Sydney to Brisbane, I can't tax receipt that. And if I want to store it at a third-party location when it gets there, I can't tax receipt that either. So a variation in that would help to incentivize the entire system for everyone to participate in it. And I think a conversation, with the greatest of respect to everything that's going on with government and with food waste and the strategy and what we're going to be at 2030. If they wanted to move the dial on this immediately, revisiting the tax status of DGR1 food relief charities would move that dial instantly. So this is a challenge for which there is a living solution right in front of us. But we need to recognize that some of the levers that need to move round about that will be commercial relationships. This will be a quasi-commercial network which functions to meet the needs of those disadvantaged communities around the country. And when I started in this job, the estimate was in that year that 2.4 million people received food aid. 3 years ago, that's 4 million this year. This is not a reversing trend. This is not going away. And frankly, I don't get any sense that in terms of social policy, there is going to be any movement here which closes that gap. Therefore, it's going to be down to us, but we will need systematic and systems change to happen, both in terms of what we can do around our tax status and how we engage with the commercial sector to bring it to life.
Thanks, Jim. Thanks, Jim. That's great. And amongst the different opportunities that we had recognized on a national basis, one of the ones is the roles of states and territories. So Amanda's here from New South Wales. A number of the other states and territories are also very active. Here in Victoria, there's a number of programs to Sustainability Victoria. In South Australia, there's a very good program through Green Industries South Australia that also does a lot of work of moving the waste from landfills up the hierarchy. But I'll let Amanda talk about what she's been doing with New South Wales over the past 4 years.
7 years program, 4 years since I've been in the job. So the area in which I work, which was up until Sunday, the Environment Protection Authority in New South Wales. It's now the Department of Planning, Industry and Environment. And we're funded from the waste levy. So the focus is largely on the food waste going to landfill and at that end of the spectrum, the bottom end of the triangle. But where we've been working is in increasing curbside collections of food waste, so food and garden collections or food-only collections. We've been investing in infrastructure to process that into compost. We've been working for avoidance with our Love Food, Hate Waste programme, but also for food donation as well too. And that area is largely around the infrastructure. So it was in actually providing, and in fact all of our programme is around actually building the infrastructure that we needed to do this, because we needed to have those foundations to do it. And the food relief sector is a good example that it's things like the vans and the fridges and the freezers and the equipment. That was where we started. 3 years ago we introduced a new programme about food donation education, because that was also about recognising there was another piece of the puzzle where things like supermarket staff, to train them to identify food before it goes off. So we've also been working in that space. And then critically along all these things, because it is actually all about the economics as well too, is in market development for compost. So it's in making sure that there is an adequate market and demand for the recycled product. So over the last 5 years, we've been working in that space, and interestingly, tax breaks for farmers to actually put compost on soil would be another game changer when it actually came for demand for that product. And it also means that's all about the value of that waste in the bin, adding value all the way through the supply chain to make it actually economically viable to pick it up and to process it and to produce this marvellous product. One of the areas that I particularly wanted to flag as well too was around the Love Food, Hate Waste programme and the household component. And that's really interesting in that, and we work really closely with Sustainability Victoria and Love Food, Hate Waste Victoria, that the more we research and understand about food waste and food behaviours, and we're a participant in the Fight Food Waste CRC, the more we realise how complex and complicated it is. The fact is that nobody actually does want to waste food. Nobody thinks, as we heard this morning, that they actually do waste food, but we all do it. But particularly interestingly, we've been tracking household food waste attitudes and behaviours for years in New South Wales, since 2009. And we've actually just recently completed, on behalf of the Fight Food Waste CRC, the national benchmark on attitudes and behaviours, which we'll all be working to and all be tracking our achievements against that to meet the halving food waste goal. But last time, for the first time, we asked people the question, what do you understand by avoidable and unavoidable food waste?
Bank is as much about transport and logistics as it is about getting food to hungry people. So it is a huge part of the puzzle. I think another game changer here in Australia was ABC's War on Waste program. It unlocked changes in behaviour in a way that I've not observed before. I mean, in Sydney, if you walk around having a takeaway coffee and it's not in a keep cup, someone will actively come and have a conversation with you about that. So there are some certain things that tapped into people's psyches around food waste and those iconic images of bananas sitting up in North Queensland. So I think making it real and as Katy pointed out before, giving that visual, I don't work in numbers. Yes, we moved 43 million kilos of food and groceries last year. Is that a lot? I don't know. It's a lot of trucks. But what does that mean? What is it in reality? How many people are we feeding? How many trucks are on the road? How are we collecting it and moving it really actively? But for me, the absolute biggest game changer is conversations like this one. We have a youth ambassador who's a close friend of with my son, and she's 11, and for the last 3 years, she's been leading a narrative in her school around food insecurity and food waste. When we have got young girls in schools prompting conversations, creating awareness and starting conversations about the fact that we have a hunger problem right here in the lucky country, that we are all part of the solution, and that food waste is a conversation we have to have and behaviours that we need to change, we are in the right place, we are on the right track. And I have to commend the organisers of this event, because not only are they talking about young Australians being part of the solution, they are living it. The fact that we have got these innovators at the beginning of every session, the fact that there are young men and women outside this room who are not only thinking about these problems but putting in place solutions and agitating for change, that's the game changer here.
Excellent. Thanks, Brianna. Katy?
I think it's to your point earlier about circular economy. That's really critical here. I've been in a number of sort of waste conferences, etc., and there is a common train of thought that if government mandated that all the roads that they build are going to be made from sand from recycled glass, then you would solve the glass waste problem tomorrow. And I think the same is true for food. If we look at the size of the opportunity, government are the biggest procurers of food in this country. If you think about all of our prisons, you think about our hospitals, education systems, etc. We've got, so many farmers out there that can't find a market for their surplus product because it's misshapen or whatever it might be. If government actually set a target of the amount of surplus food they would procure directly from the source for those who grow it or make it, they would have a profound impact on the amount of food going to waste immediately. These aren't really hard things to do when we talk about the tax, etc. Now, of course, you have to look at displacement and what shifts when you make those changes, but I think that there is a huge opportunity. I think about our farmers who are 2.5 times more likely to take their life than any other profession. There is something profoundly wrong with our system, and we need to change it. So, when I look at the Yume platform as an example, and we've given $4 million back to Australian farmers and Australian manufacturers so far, I think there is a very, very easy way to start to have impact at that government level, both federal and state.
Great. Thanks, Katy. Carly, you've got the mic.
Yeah, thanks. For instance, I go back to 2014 when Steve Lappage, myself and others were trying to put together a CRC bid, and it wasn't successful on that occasion. But 2017, there was just the atmosphere, the vibe, basically. It was all there. The alignment of people, partners, industry across the whole supply chain, from farm, production, through to retail, with state government, with researchers, basically what the CRC is. That's where I see that's just had sort of a flow-on effect, along with the strategy that was launched in November of 2017. I think that also gave an opportunity for people to have a conversation and to really start to have that discussion. And I think with some of the research that we've been doing at RMIT as well, it's actually going into a manufacturing facility or on farm and just having a conversation. Why does this happen? Why is something falling off the production line? Or why is this going here? And actually questioning that, and then hopefully working with those within the supply chain, within that organisation, to actually step back and go, that's not acceptable. We actually need to do things differently. We need to be more efficient. We need to value the resources that go into making food and actually not waste along the supply chain at all. So I think that's an encouraging part, and that's what, I'm looking forward to.
So, Jim or Amanda?
Okay, I'm going to have another run at this. The thing that needs to change most to deliver on this is will. If there's a collective will to get this done, this will get done. And I'll be completely frank, I don't attend many conferences where the entire focus or the conversation is about waste, particularly with respect to food. All of the environmental outputs that come from Second Bite are a byproduct of our primary purpose. And if you want to understand what the most wasted resource in this country is, it's the potential waste of 4 million lives blighted by this. And anyone who loses sight around that with respect to measuring water or measuring CO2 or measuring any of these other things is completely missing the point. So where we need to get to is, as a society, making a decision that is within our gift. This is not imaginary. This is not something that cannot be resolved. Will is what's required, because if you bring that, everything else is in place to make it happen. And I'm like Brianna. I can go and do something else.
Excellent. Okay, Amanda?
Well, I wasn't so bothered to answer the question because I don't know that there is one thing, and I think it's everything.
Yeah.
We do need to do that, which is part of that, and that will's up there, but we actually do need to do an awful lot of things all the way along the supply chain. But connecting them, I think, is one good step, and actually the UN Sustainable Development Goals do that. They connect, particularly when it comes to food waste, all of these things around why it's a good thing to do. And I think maybe we haven't had that connection up until now.
Yes. Okay. Excellent. So do we have any questions from the audience? We have a mic. We have a roving mic.
Okay, maybe if people are thinking about a question, I have one on the app here for you.
Thank you.
Slightly controversial, but we love controversy. It's death by consensus. Do you see a future where all of Australia's food rescue organisations, e.g. Food Bank, Oz Harvest, Second Bite, etc., are combining forces to reduce the overhead costs and streamline food rescue operations? Could we have just one efficient food rescue organisation?
Okay, if I had $1 for every time I heard this question, I wouldn't work. The truth of the matter is there are 4 organisations in this space. The eventual system that's produced will be a hybrid of the things that are being learned as part of the modelling that's going on in each. This notion that all of a sudden this thing has to be quickly brought together is a fallacy. It needs to be brought together when we understand it properly. And there's none of us in this space that are not still learning how that works. I think we all have a view that at some point, if we can find the system, maybe none of us will be in the space. You know what? Maybe your states or maybe your governments will actually run this if we hand them the system in the right order. So all of the learning that's going on feeds collectively into what we understand about how this needs to be addressed. And as long as that remains the case, I am not making a case for rationalising this.
Brianna?
Oh, far be it for me to debate that one. From my perspective, we've got to look at the whole of supply chain. We keep talking about it, whether you call it a circular economy or whatever we want to term it. From my perspective, we've got to look at the whole picture. One of the biggest capacity constraints for us, even if Jim doubled the volume of food relief through Second Bite, I doubled it through Food Bank, Oz Harvest doubled theirs, we're still not getting to food deserts in Australia where there aren't charity networks for us to be able to distribute those foods. We know that the charity sector is changing all of the time. One of our biggest bottlenecks at Food Bank is the fact that a lot of those regional charities that used to be open 5 days a week are now open 1 day a week. The volunteers running them are now in their 70s and 80s and can't lift heavy boxes and aren't available or don't have connection to country. There's all of these challenges whole of picture, which is why we've been advocating to government for a whole of government strategy, because at the moment, food relief is seen as an environment problem because of food rescue. We're seen as a social services problem because we're dealing with people who are vulnerable. We're not being seen as education for the work we're doing around school breakfast programs. We're not being seen as preventative health. We're not being seen as agriculture for the work that we are doing with primary production. Every piece of government has a connection back to the food relief and food and agribusiness sector. We need to start looking at those whole of sector solutions. And I'm with Jim, it's not about the structure of the food relief sector, it is about the system and how we work with it.
Great.
Okay, Carolyn, I've got one more for you. This is actually for Katy. Katy, how many companies are currently participating in the Yume Foods initiative, and what's the feedback been like to date? It's really well known. Is it well known across the industry?
Okay, so the feedback initially was, you're completely mad, it won't work. No one in their right mind is going to go online and buy surplus food and hand over their cash. And I'm pleased to say that we're proving them wrong. So that's a good start. Since we began 4 years ago, we now have over 2,500 buyers that are registered. That's business buyers. And I sort of noted some of those earlier, and we have over 350 suppliers. So these are people that periodically, sometimes consistently, have product that's out of spec. And to give you a couple of examples of the kind of product we move, we had one example in Tasmania where, you know those salad packs that people buy in the supermarket where you kind of like think you're going to be a chef overnight and you put all your bits in a bowl and ta-da, salad niçoise. Well, they made one for one of the supermarkets, and in the packet were these little see-through pouches of tuna. Now, let me tell you, that looks a little bit like cat food. So no surprising, didn't go so well. And they pushed back and said, we're actually not going to run this line anymore. But that left the supplier in Tasmania with 550,000 unlabelled sachets of yellowfin tuna in olive oil blend with zero avenue to market because it was unlabelled. And it was in these see-through pouches which didn't look so great. That's 27.5 tonne of fish that's been pulled out the ocean, then packaged, put in olive oil, and then is going to be landfilled because can't afford to move it to the mainland to redistribute it. So we found buyers for them so that they could pick, pack, ship that product to the mainland. And it went to salad manufacturers, it went to sandwich manufacturers, and Harris Farm came to the party and relabelled big boxes of 10. So that's an indication of some of the sizable problems that we are seeing solved, not because of us, but because human beings by nature are incredibly creative and innovative. So you put something like that up there, Facebook went wild. Has everyone seen these pouches of tuna that are up there? This is outrageous. We've got to help this supplier, because it was a small family business. And the problem was solved. So I believe in the power of people's creativity and innovation if you just give them the tools to make it happen.
Excellent. Okay.
Yeah, g'day. Hello. In reducing Australia's food waste, we've got three big, I guess, levels. We've got consumerism, manufacturing, and production. Is there thought process around about, are we looking at more shifting that, say, out of production into manufacturing where we're actually not reducing food waste? Is there a closed level element being put in place through, Carly, what you're doing, but also then through government, Amanda, of the states working together to actually look ahead so it does become a pure cycle? Does that make sense? So it's not shifting from production into manufacturing and still creating food waste? That consumerism at the end, I'm in the fresh food business, but my biggest worry is that through production, manufacturing is going to become as a bigger food waste out of anything that we've ever seen before, and we've not really thought about it in the long run.
Yeah, and I think that's where there's opportunity now through the National Food Waste Strategy and that whole supply chain. So whereas previously we've been looking at it in terms of isolation, and there's pockets of it. You know, there's the how you the household level, or the cafes and restaurants, or that the stuff that's collected on the curbside. But there's actually the opportunity to look at it all the way through the supply chain, and that includes things like the cold supply chain as well, where you can prevent food waste by making sure things are kept cold before they get to the consumer. But in terms of manufacturing, and it's the discussion this morning, like around the banana powder and the other value adding with food, and that's where I think that's where we're going. There's a lot of that work happening in Europe already, but it's actually using the manufacturing sector to find other ways to manage this food waste and having it ending up in the bin. So broadly, it's an area of opportunity. It's not an area that's already had much investment up until now, but I think that's certainly where we need to be going. And in New South Wales, the new circular economy policy has this pillar of one of the 6, which is valuing organics, and in that it's about maximising the value all the way through the supply chain to make sure that the best thing can happen to that food at that particular time. And yeah.
Is that saving or diversification though?
It's everything. So in terms of where it fits into the circular economy policy, it's around valuing it. It is valuing it as a resource that you might be able to extract chemicals or proteins or fats, or turn it into pet food, do something with it before it ends up ever going in the bin. But that also all the way through the supply chain, but also valuing it at the other end, so that when you're processing the unavoidable food waste into compost, it's a high value product which has got blended to a particular area of crop production, so that it maximises that value. So at the moment, the industry is changing in terms of the processing industry, but it is producing a product. It's producing compost, but it's actually, we're wanting to shift them to produce a tailored product into tailored markets. So it's at all points, I think.
So,
I think what we're also seeing is specific supply chains starting to tackle it as well. And as we know, each supply chain has different reasons why waste is occurring. And so seeing those parties come together to actually really nut out exactly why are things happening, and then what is the best opportunities going forward, I think we'll see that. And then that might also be on a regional basis as well. So if particular resources are being generated somewhere, how can you, from a circular economy perspective, not be shipping that, halfway across the country, but how can you be using it on a local or a regional scale as well? So I think, I guess I'm positive seeing that there's going to be lots of different ways that this can be tackled. It's a big challenge as well.
Here's one from the app, and there's actually quite a few questions coming through from the app regarding government and being able to connect the dots. How do we become more efficient, more effective in connecting the dots?
Thanks. I like to think in New South Wales we've done that well in where we've come to so far. So we've been unusual and fortunate in having this $100 million investment that we've been putting in the last 7 years. And why it's done as well as it has is because it's connected all the way through the supply, from the disposal end. So it's looking at avoidance, it's looking at collections, it's looking at processing and markets. So that's good. What the benchmark data is showing us is that the other bits of it through manufacturing and primary production, and they're the dots that I'd like us to then kind of like move on to next. The other part of that, though, is in all of those areas of work that we've been doing already, is that there is so much more to do. Like we know with food donation, we're just barely tipping the edge of the potential that we could for recovery of quality surplus food, like even through the hospitality businesses, but also working in hospitality. So we're just at the tip of the iceberg, but for me, where I'd like us to go with the next stage of the programme is actually taking from the work that we've done now, building on that, but also bringing in those earlier up the supply chain. So we are looking at it holistically.
So from a national perspective, one of the things that's occurred is that the Commonwealth government has been working with the states and territories through a waste policy, but looking at the circular economy and trying to join the dots in that way, and recognizing that the Commonwealth has certain powers and certain abilities to do things like tax that perhaps states and territories don't. So there's an awareness of the kind of who does what at the best level and how it works together as a system to deliver a better outcome for everyone.
Thank you for the opportunity. I just wanted to, one of the biggest things that really frustrates me in working with farmers in regional communities is that farmers grow what they think the market wants. But there's a real disconnect between what the consumer's consuming or businesses are buying and what the farmers are growing. Surely the solution to reducing food waste is actually growing more of what we eat and eating more of what we grow. Is there, sounds like a simple pithy one-liner, but is there any way that we can share data with farmers to actually help them understand where the gaps in the market are at certain times of the year? You're seeing now with climate change, food regions are clashing with each other. So you used to grow capsicums in North Queensland and it had progressively moved down the coast, and every farming region would have their window of opportunity. That's changing, and farmers aren't responding because they don't know how to fix it. How can we share data with farmers to inform them where their window of opportunity is, and how do we get that collaboration happening to actually reduce the supply of wasted product?
I can't answer the whole question. It's a very big question. But one of the projects that we've got planned for the next 12 months is to look at mapping areas. And one of the benefits of working with such huge industrial caterers, Qantas Lounges, etc., and all of these buyers is that often we have their shopping lists that are uploaded. So we understand what they're buying, the quantity they're buying. Now, Yume is very specifically about surplus food because we want to move surplus food and give that money back to the farmers and Australian manufacturers. But what we're looking to do is use a pull system as opposed to a push system. You're talking about a push system. I grow it, I'm pushing it to market, you buy it. We're looking at something that's a pull system. All right, well, I need this. When this product comes up in surplus, then I will be available to take that. And then it's going a step further and saying, all right, well, how can we partner with technology that can actually ascertain how much of that crop is not going to meet the aesthetic standards that are required for its usual passage to sale? And then preloading that onto a platform before it's even been picked, so you're saving the farmer money there, and then pulling that through to people that have already registered an interest. So that is a project, a pilot that we're looking to do in the next 12 months that we believe will, excuse the pun, bear fruit and really answer some of those questions. But it's in its infancy, and I really haven't seen it happening anywhere else. But I'm with you. It's totally important.
I just wanted to give you some confidence that there is some amazing stuff happening on the ground, and I do have a conflict of interest. I'm former Farmers Federation, both in Queensland and New South Wales farmers, but National Farmers Federation has a 2030 blueprint. They are all about achieving a $100 billion industry for farmers and rural and regional communities. I think they're in a great position to do that. Yes, we've got challenges with drought and access to natural resources and so on, but some of the observations and exposure that I've had through our major supermarkets and retailers, there's some really cool initiatives happening at the moment back through the supply chain where suppliers are working hand in hand with those retailers in a way I've never seen before. So I think we are on the cusp of really having some of the most innovative and whole of supply chain partnerships rather than relationships that we've ever seen. So I just wanted to give you some confidence there is some really good stuff happening on the ground.
There's also some really good things happening from a research perspective. So CSIRO has been working with the fruit and veg people across the country and done work in regional areas and understanding what is lost in the actual on-farm and then what's lost in the pack houses as well, because that's another place where there's some losses. Following on from Brianna, I'm speaking to the National Farmers Federation's Horticultural Council on Thursday to talk to them about the dimensions of the opportunity and to get their feedback so that we can embed that within the strategy. So there is a partnership happening.
Hello. Congratulations on all the research, firstly, on food waste, because we don't know how to solve something unless we know what we're actually trying to talk about. But may I talk about the first part of the food waste problem, which is in the primary producers? I'm working with a farmer, and this farmer has a crop value of around $28 million a year, and they lose 50% to waste. Now, this farmer has been disposing of this crop to cattle feed, and that you could say that was a zero waste solution, but the loss for this farmer is incredible. So it's a very big loss. So this farmer is trying to regain or re-win back the loss of their crop through upcycling. We'll use that word, upcycling. And the solution we've been working with this farmer has been a dual solution to be part of the circular economy with a zero waste solution as part of the waste solution problem. So I hope I'm making sense here. So the question I have is, when a person is able to bring back the value of what we initially saw as a waste to bring back the loss from that waste, what would you advise that person to do in terms of going about being able to utilise what is available in the current funding streams to achieve that? Because we were relying initially on funding vouchers from the Victorian State Government, which failed to come through as an implementation strategy. And now this farmer is at a loss as to what is the next step.
Okay. No. Well, I guess one step is, for instance, the CRC would, not knowing who the farmer is, but obviously the CRC is a platform to be able to have a conversation about what is that waste that's occurring, why is that occurring, and then where are the opportunities to value add. So that's one example. There's also one of the programs within the CRCs, the SME Solution Centre as well. So that's another little pocket of funding. But yeah, there's lots of different, I guess, funding opportunities that are out there, and it's having a conversation with key parties would be one suggestion.
And we'd love to hear from you. So maybe come and grab our details afterwards. One of the really interesting stories we've seen has been a very large cannery, canning peaches. There's a byproduct from that canning process, which is a huge amount of peach pulp that had been stockpiled year on year on year on year in these huge barrels, and there was nowhere for it to go. And we were so impressed that we thought, well, just give it a try, put it on the platform, see what happens. And Lion Nathan bought it and turned it into Byron Bay Brewery beer. And it was fabulous. So I think there are a lot of innovative solutions out there that are happening.
So that's a really good way to end on. Let's all think about having a Byron Bay beer later this afternoon, perhaps. So thank you. Join with me, please, in thanking the panel. We've had a really good conversation about a really challenging problem.
Give it up to the panel. Thank you very much.